My name is Monk Rowe, and I'm at Hamilton College, and I'm pleased to be speaking with Christine Jensen, who's at Eastman. I want to congratulate you on your career thus far.
Thank you.
It's an interesting read and listen. Now, if I'm correct that your job description at Eastman is Assistant Professor of Jazz Studies and Contemporary Media. Is that right?
Yes.
So this is maybe an odd question, but why do you think the powers that be at Eastman hired you? Because I'm guessing that there were probably quite a few applicants.
I heard there was a lot of applicants and I I am replacing someone who is irreplaceable in the name of Bill Dobbins, who has left a legacy in so many ways. Um, why did they hire me? I can never get into that too much. I do feel this music and the movement of it is in for a big change, especially within the institution walls of the young business of teaching jazz at the higher level, which only started 50 years ago or so. And there was a lot of tenure involved, and there still is. But that that generation is now starting to retire. So I think we're going to see a lot more inclusion, best word I can put it, with where the music is going and with where the education of the music is going.
It's become a large business as well. I remember I was at SUNY Fredonia and I graduated in 72, and we had a fine jazz band, but there were no classes, there were no jazz professors. There was a struggle to get rehearsal rooms for jazz, etc. And think of where it's at now.
Still have a ways to go though. I'm deep in thought in all of what you're talking about, partly because I'm teaching I'm teaching a master's pedagogy in jazz course, which we discuss a lot of these things, and jazz in the institution has blossomed out of a classical institution. Therefore, they've held the reins and had all the rules and had all the space, and they have let us come into their space a little bit, and it hasn't been the other way around ever. So what you're describing is what I feel still.
I've wondered in talking with quite a few musicians and trying to remember who, I guess it was Rand Blake who said something about the supremacy of the ear. Might have been his phrase, but it made me think about how can you justify at an institution like you're in, one of famous around the world,
Mhm.
if you wanted to spend a lot of time teaching young jazz musicians to use their ear, can you justify that in a curriculum?
Absolutely. Um, Jazz is an oral tradition first, I think. I don't think it was written down from the beginnings, much like classical was probably not until the word classical was put on it. It was probably not written down. The refinement of our tools has pushed us into this Western music corner of what to define as what to be taught. And in theoretical terms, that's a heavy discussion. But in basic terms, to me, this music, which is jazz, is an oral tradition. Much, whether it's Duke Ellington or Louis Armstrong or um, the Delta blues guitar players or the country meets city blues that birthed this scene, basically, it wasn't written down necessarily. Ellington eventually wrote things down, but a lot of stuff was done by ear. And when we look at popular music, a lot of that is done by ear as well. And it's also about really defining one's or expressing one's own individual voice at a very high level. So all those things together make me think, wow, wouldn't it be great if we just had a school of oral learning?
Can you spell oral for me?
Aural.
Okay. I I have a bug about that because
Oh, Oral.
yes, you see people writing sort of what you're saying, but they say Oral. I go, no, no, no. I mean,
Yeah, that's
it's
oral
partly
care.
speaking, but yeah, okay.
No,
Well,
I have students that are trying to describe this to me because they don't understand where they're coming from, even, and they're at a very high level, and they're trying to put this into words. And every time I go, all you're talking about is oral learning, and that is what jazz is. It's if you can't do it by ear, there's going to be a problem pretty fast in expressing yourself with this music.
do you think the access that they have now to just about everything in all the different media is a positive or negative to them learning the music and specifically learning to use their ear?
I want to say positive. There's some negative because it's not far off. I mean, what a crazy thing. I now get to say I'm from a generation where when I was learning, there was no cell phones, there was no internet connection, there was no media. All we had were records and tapes and cassettes and 50% slow down playback. Um, and hopefully the resources landed in front of us from someone that was able to share, I don't know, the right way to sift through a library or a record store or something for us to get the information in front of us, right? And even before me, my generation, all they had were records. And before that generation, all they had was piano player rolls, probably. Do you know what I mean? All of it is a learning tool that is very strong. And it's kind of about sifting through it. Now they just have way more to sift through. Just like media, we have way more to sift through. And it's easy to get things covered up. It's funny because a student of mine played me. He did a listening test on me, and I completely failed it. It was Lester Young, Buddy Rich, and Guess the Piano Player. You would never guess the piano player, and it was a trio from like 1942.
Was that with Teddy Wilson?
Close. Nat King Cole
Yeah.
playing the crap out of the piano. Like just, I was just like, I had, I grew up with lots of Nat King Cole, but it was the more popular Nat King Cole. And now I'm like, this guy set the bar for everybody off this recording from 1942 or whatever year it was of a trio with a bassless
No
trio.
bass player. Wow.
And it's like, where have I been? Like, what did I miss? Do you know what I mean? In the lineage of the whole thing. So what are they missing now? I don't know. I mean, I think it's some things I think are the same. Like the hippest thing going for me, the hippest thing going was Branford Marsalis and Sting and Winton and a bunch of things. Now the hippest thing going is still Brad Meldau and I don't know who are the younger cats. I guess the piano player who's all these names are going to escape me right now, but there's the swing to in instrumental jazz anyway, toward whatever the new kid on the it was Roy Hargrove for the longest time. They're still listening to Roy Hargrove. I'm like, that's great, but man, there's so much history and Roy's playing coming from the masters. So it's just I think that's the great thing about education is that we do get to share some reality checks on the history and the pedagogy of the music in a learning space. And I'm so afraid because I just hope that these learning spaces continue to exist because the world is getting swallowed up by a lot of other things that are much more negative.
Is it an issue for you to try to keep up with contemporary media. You're supposed to be an
Oh, it's
instructor.
horrible.
It's like, what's new this week?
Actually, what I really don't like, again, I guess I'm getting old because I've lived through a generation of the heyday of making money off records in jazz, or not even making money, but like clearing a profit, maybe a small profit, but not going the other way. And now with the gobbling up of our, the Maria Schneider whole thing that she's gone into with the digital world gobbling us up. I totally agree with her. I mean, I'm told to have this app on my phone that's called Spotify Artist, where I count, and the industry is counting how many people are listening to my music, and they can really see it.
And what do they do with that information?
Well, they decide whether or not I'll get a gig, first of all, or they decide whether or not my music is worthy in their world. It has to do with playlists. I mean, we never had playlists when I was a kid. We made our own playlists, you know? So yeah, it's scary times to say the least. And there's no money there. I mean, there is money out there. I have some students that are quite successful with this new platform, but I like former students that have gone on to really great careers. But I also have a huge swath of musicians that are not even willing to record at a high level because what's the point? It costs so much. It's this infernal machine of
Have you self-financed some of your recordings over the last 10 years or so?
I'm in the middle of one right now. I have mostly through grant funding.
Yeah.
Although I have to say the last small album I did was the first time in a long time where I went into the studio and the label paid me, they paid my musicians, and they paid for all of the production, and they still printed CDs. They had grants to do that, mind you, but that's also a very big difference between Canada and the US.
That
Canada,
it's still happening in Canada.
yeah, there's still a lot of media funding that was, that laws were put into place. It's like if you're going to go and destroy us, you better have a bit of funding left to prop up the industry that once was, or for us to continue in it. Otherwise, not much is going to happen with art.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to talk about your extensive range of compositions. Can you describe where, let's suppose I commissioned you for something for Hamilton College, something new.
Yeah.
What would be the first question you would ask of me for some guidelines?
I think, oh, that's a big one. I'm certainly not going to say dump my world onto yours and go, I'm just going to do this. I would want to get to know a little bit about the space you're living in and what is feeding your environment culturally and through the natural and through the urban environment, and what is, even historically, maybe there's some great figure there that I don't that I want to put a lens on. Do you know what I mean? I like to put my lens on things, or a lens on your things that are important to you, and try to capture that, I suppose, through my music. I would also want to know what level of musicians I'm writing for too. Those are basically it. I'd want to have a conversation. I want to go out for lunch and go, tell me about yourself. You're going to commission me. I want to know why this interests you, and what is the feeling in the music that you want to have. It's kind of like a painting. It's like if you commission me for a painting, you're going to give me a subject matter, most likely. unless you're like, no, I don't want that. It's like all about Christine, and whatever space she's in, she can just write whatever she wants. Or we approach it another way, which is like, tell me, I want to get to know what elements I'm dealing with from your space.
That's that's very illuminating, I think, because some people might say, "Well, I want to know the instrumentation, and what are you going to pay me?" Really logistical things, but it makes sense with what I've been reading about you. And what if I said, "Okay, I want another Habitat from you, Habitat
Oh
Part
gosh. Well, that's a big album, and I'm putting a new one out in June. I'm really excited about, which is ironically about the subject we're talking about. And I think I highlighted in my liner notes that nobody's going to read because they're not going to buy the CD, but because they're going to just listen to it on Spotify. No offense. But each piece has been a commission. Um, there's 7 pieces. 6 of them are big commissions, and one actually is kind of an inner commission from my bandmates to myself. We all commissioned each other, or gave each other topics to pass around. So I don't even have time to get into it on the liner notes because there's not enough space anymore unless I write a book about it, which I might have to do on the side eventually. But where was I going with this? The commissioning idea. Oh yeah, so this whole album coming up is kind of different from Habitat and Tree Lines, because those were for the most part me hanging out in my space. And I suppose the commissioning came from quite a bit of government funding, because I was always running off to a retreat to write, or having some reason to write. Like sometimes I was like, I just want to write for my band. I want to write for the musicians that are in my band. I want to write for all sorts of things. This one is like, I've written for a bunch of different situations like you described. How much money are you paying me? How much, who's the soloist in the band? What are the highlights? What's the topic? One guy was so cool. He was like, I love Tree Lines so much, but you didn't call a song Tree Lines. Can you write a piece called Tree Lines? And I was like, that's brilliant. You're right. I never did write a piece called Tree Lines. So that was on Habitat. So it was like a little connector. And now this next one is for the most part commissions that may or may not have featured my sister, or may have featured myself, or may have featured other musicians. And then I just kind of reorchestrated it to match the ensemble I work with in Montreal, going back to
Yeah.
Habitat and Tree Lines.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned liner notes because that's where much of my jazz education came from, reading the back of the liner notes. And for Habitat, speaking of liner notes, I want to
You
read
found them?
I want to read an excerpt, and I'm wondering if you've heard this. It's from a website called Jazz da Gama, which I
Maybe.
believe came from a fellow in Brooklyn, and it's really, really lengthy. I'm going to read a small part of it uh, if I can. It's referring to Habitat, Christine Jensen's Habitat, and it says, its lines leap off planes to join other lines that leap off other planes, there to reconstitute in harmonic progressions that entwine like the double helix of a musical DNA that is subtle and nimble and barely discernible. But in actual fact, it is arthroscopically formed by other lines that shape this gorgeous musical icosahedron.
Wow. Can you send that to me?
Wow. And it
I'll
goes
put
on
that
and
in
on.
my
And
next album.
this fellow's like a poet. And I will
Yeah.
send you the link to it. But I think I had a question there, and that is 2 parts. What do you think about when you hear something like that? And do you think of your own music in such deep and poetic terms?
I do not. I wish I could. Um, I think that's a reflection off of my art through their art in a way, with the art of word. And I wish I could do that, but I think my art of word ended up in music. And I mean, I think it's the greatest gift back to me is when people really are engaged in anything I do. Um, I'm not I'm not making them do it. Do you know what I mean? I'm not like, you have to sit down and listen to me. I'm more like, here's my attempt at describing my feelings and my thoughts and my process, and I'm putting it out, and hopefully I get something back through things like that, actually, whether they do a painting or they're on a drive and they hear the music and they're like, "Oh my God, you made the environment look different," or something.
When do your titles come into play?
My title. Someone asked. I was on an interview just before this, and that same question came up. They were like, "How do you come up with your titles?" And I said, "Well, I think again it comes from. I mean, again, with commissions, there might be something outlined verbally about the piece. For example, I just did an album with the Winnipeg Jazz Orchestra with my friend Jill Townsend, and we equally wrote the same amount of music, and we had a theme. So the themes were pretty easy to get into. The theme was water. That's a pretty broad theme, by the way. But and then we were like, we're both in Canada. We both grew up on water. We both grew up on opposite coasts. She was from Nova Scotia. I was from BC, and we both wrote about pieces from each side. So I wrote about a piece off the St. Lawrence River. She wrote a piece off of Nova Scotia, and then we both wrote pieces off based off of areas around the Pacific Northwest. So those titles were really fun to come up with, and I had a theme. So I was like, oh, water. One thing I've always, where's that place I love to go with water? And one that popped in my head was like being in the place I was born, which is Seashell, British Columbia. It's beautiful. It's just all view of water and mountains, and hanging out with my cousin and learning how to skip rocks. So I was trying to get the idea of rock skipping, getting past 3, getting past 4, getting past 5, and the whole calm kind of feeling of the water lapping on the beach. So I had a lot to work with there. So it's called rock skipping under the half moon, because we were always out there just before dinner or just after dinner, and then we were being called in, and by then it was so dark we couldn't skip rocks anymore. So that's a story. There, I have a story.
I love it. You familiar with the American entertainer Steve Allen?
Yes, my
Yes.
mother used to listen to him.
Okay, because I asked him a question about naming instrumental compositions, and he could be pithy and a bit sarcastic, and he said basically, well, instrumental music can't tell you anything.
No.
But you're saying that you write music without lyrics that reflects memories that you have.
Yeah, it does. It reflects those childhood memories of innocence a lot. Um, I think there's a point in our lives where the innocent line happens and it breaks and you're not innocent anymore. And I think a lot like that kind of thing was then. But if I go back to that project, the other piece was completely in the now, which was a piece about me learning how to paddleboard over rapids, and I guess there were a lot of currents. So it was just in the now. So it was just called passing machine. Is that it? I forget. But something like that. But it was just the area I was in and the moment I'm in. So sometimes I captured just that exact moment I'm in. It has nothing to do with my past. Do you know what I mean?
Would you say you
So
had?
so
Would you?
sometimes I guess I do reflections, and sometimes I'm doing or reflections from childhood, and other times I'm doing reflections of something very recent. Or I might be imagining something I've never done. So there's no rhyme or reason to to titles sometimes. But fantasy is a big part of it for me. I'll send you my new liner notes of my new album, because it's all about what we're talking about. And one of the things is that I start my liner notes saying, I've always had my nose in a book. And my family always laughed, or my family always noticed or something, I forget what I said, about me always having my nose in a book. And so as much as I had this gorgeous supernatural environment around me, just like Ingrid did, and I think it comes through in her trumpet and her writing, um, I think also I was really, I've always been very interested in American literature, actually. So, or more current American literature, like Jonathan Franzen. I love his descriptions of society in general. So I might just sit and I've written pieces about his books and his place with emotion.
Was there any sibling envy or competition between you and Ingrid?
I think there always is in families, and there probably was with us, probably to do with our parents or with other people and getting attention. I mean, that's a lot of what childhood is, getting your parents' attention and getting her attention. I was the younger sister. I wanted her attention, and I got it, and in the best of ways, I think. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's there may have been moments of that, especially when you're younger, but it's now growing into like, wow, I wish I had your problems. I wish you had my problems kind of thing. Like we're both struggling all the time with the element of time and the element of creating music and raising families. So we don't have time for jealousy so much, I don't think. Different things happen to both of us though. So
Okay, here's a quote from you. Started out, you were talking about being a instrumentalist, a saxophonist, and an educator, but you focused on composing, and you said the essence of being a composer is the deepest, hardest place I go in my life. And can you tell me why it's hard? Why is it? I mean, I know from speaking.
oh, I think it's hard because I have to start fresh all the time. It's like a new start every time I compose, as opposed to performance where I'm kind of revisiting a um, rhythmic activity in a way. And not that composing isn't, but I'm in the now with other people, as opposed to composition where I'm having to get into the now with myself. And I think there's a really big difference from the act of the two things. There's similarities, but there's also this. I mean, I went through so much isolation the last 4 years with this. So it's led me to a place where I'm like, I just want to, I really want to find a balance between performance and composition because both of them are good for my soul.
Do you write at the computer?
No, I wish. I could barely turn my computer on when I'm composing. Once I get into it, I will. And that means writing larger ensemble music. I can write all small sketches in on a notepad. That's what I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember going to the house of your colleague, Dave Ravello, and I was pleased to see this big, it was almost like an architectural type table.
Yeah.
And he had his King manuscript paper.
Very good at outlining with all that. I wish I was as organized. Although I mean, every artist has their space. I think there's been lots of documentaries on that, but your living sort of working space, and it's certainly, I actually thought, oh, finally going to be a real professor with my own office at a school, and I'm going to work there, and I can barely work there because there's too much work there. I still need my own space to work in. So your home space becomes really important, I think. once you figure that out. And Dave's done a great job of that with having lots of space to freely write. And that's kind of what I have with my studio in Montreal that I'm still spending a lot of time at. And hopefully I'll develop one here more, but I haven't yet because I'm still trying to figure out Rochester.
Have you ever had an experience that you wrote glowingly about people that you work with, the soloists and so forth? I wonder if you've ever had a semi-awkward experience where people were interpreting your music during their solos in a fashion that didn't really ring for you. And as the composer, if you had to say, could you consider a different approach to this?
That happens all the time, I think. Um, I might, if I write something new and I throw it down in front of the band, this is like large ensemble. It's a little different than small ensemble. Small, if I'm in a quartet, I can freely go crazy with my thoughts with the band because there's only 3 or 4 of them in the room with me. But when you get to the hierarchy of placing a big band together, there's like little leadership roles going on everywhere, right? So lead trumpet players are different everywhere. Drummers are different everywhere. So I might have to get into things more with certain players depending on the situation. With my own band, if I'm writing something new and it's not really connecting, I might just stop and talk about what I wrote about and why I wrote it. And that tends to put the whole thing back together. So, for example, Nishayu on Habitat I wrote that because I had been probably sitting in my office doing work or writing, and every day on the CBC the news came on about this certain tribe up north beyond Hudson Bay, like up on the, I think it's up on the east side of Hudson Bay. Do you know how far away that is? That's very, very, very far away. It's like 3,000 kilometers or something. And they're sitting up there, this tribe of a young group of people from the community, and they're like, we have no drinking water, and we need to send a message to the government about how our drinking water is not clean. We live in Canada. Every person should have the right to clean drinking water. And they went on this march. So I hadn't told anyone this. They didn't know what Nishayu was. I'm like, this is actually a branch off the Cree tribe that is going to march through the most miserable conditions in the world of weather from north to south, from January to March to Parliament Hill. So they meet at the right time with the prime minister and blah, blah. So anyway, I had to tell the story, and I was like practically in tears over it. And then they played it so beautifully. You know what I mean? But they didn't know what Nishayu was. They didn't know anything until I sat down, and I think I pulled a Globe and Mail article on it, and I said, and I gave it to my soloist. I said, you know what? Just read this, and it'll all make sense. You're my leader on this piece, and ever since, I just love playing that with them.
Wow. I watched a video from Jazz Composers Present that you were on, and you were talking about, I think it was I think the name of the song was Leap, maybe part 3.
Oh yeah,
Remember
Leap.
that?
Yeah, that's part of my suite, Under the Influence.
Okay. So you had the score up and you were talking about some of the background, and you mentioned a couple things like this came from, I'm not sure if it was, you said Ionian, but you said melodic minor. What is it?
Yeah, the modes.
The modes. And then you said you're doing something with a Coltrane matrix. So I think my question here is, have you ever written anything, or have your students written anything that has no seemingly recognizable form or technique or chord structure, but it sounds good and you don't know why?
Not sure about my students. Um, I find that's a really tough question. I mean, form is something. It's kind of the philosophy of what is composition. A philosophy in composition is describing form and manipulating form and creating form. Sometimes it's like everything else, it's all been done. Do you know what I mean? Everything's been done. We're going to just start repeating over and over what's been done, and maybe something we can add on to it, much like 12 tone ruined classical music. Is Are we going to be able to do that again with jazz form, I guess, which comes off a bunch of other forms anyway. But I'm kind of going off. That's a tough question.
I,
Um,
I think what I'm after here is, I have to admit, I used to have an attitude about not just composers, but pop musicians who didn't have any theoretical background. And thankfully, I got over it because I recognized that some of these musicians come up with things that I don't think they would have done had they had a bunch of rules or, ways to
yeah,
do things that they learned from somebody else. And so I'm just wondering if,
definitely a more natural process of coming from a different place that is not chock full of harmony, of harmony rules, but also more basic too, because it's not like they're studying the classical art form of their instrument. It's the best way I can put it. They're just working on their sound and putting out. Um, and to me, that's intriguing because I think it's a place I go to. I was brought up on a lot of pop music. It was kind of my drug as a kid was to listen to top 40 radio and find things I liked. And I didn't like everything. I really didn't like everything, but there was the odd thing I really liked.
what did you like?
Um, oh, I loved the Police. When they that album came out, I was just like, Synchronicity. Sorry, I know they had other albums before it. I liked those ones too, but when once Synchronicity hit, I was like, how did they do this album? Why is it the way it is? Um, and that has been a huge influence on me. I can hear it in a lot of progressions I write actually, and then I'm trying to push past those progressions sometimes. And it's all, just to put the word out, it's all Ionian. They don't leave Ionian.
Did you sit at the
And you
piano with the records and poke out the bass parts and then, work out the chords to some of these songs?
Yeah, for pop songs, definitely. I also read sheet music. Because my mother was a classical piano teacher and she didn't understand the oral concept at all. And it wasn't her fault. And I actually feel for her because I think she really, in another life she wanted to be a jazz musician. Do you know what I mean? She was just on a quest all the time. There was music that made her feel good. Well, what makes you feel good, I guess, is the sort of driving underneath it all for me. What makes me go, wow, I just want to listen to that again and figure it out. And unfortunately, I have very close friends that are musicians, mostly men, that are really great buddies of mine, and I'll sit there and they'll be, isn't this amazing? And I'm like, no, I'm not hearing what you're hearing. And mostly it's because I was never into vocals. I was never into the poetry of the word. I was too transfixed with the melodies and the harmonies and the rhythms that the vocal part just got completely sidelined. And now I'm really into it. So it's okay. It just took me a long time, you know? But but I think that's, if you meet all these great instrumental musicians, they kind of, the again, our lens has been trained a certain way. I think classical piano does it to you too, or classical lessons of some sort that train you into really hearing visualizing the rhythm and the harmony, much more so it distracts, and then, but not in a bad way. It's gonna it fed me lots of ideas. But the Police, I can't sing every lyric, but they did catch me a lot on the lyric, to the point where I was doing that repetitive thing that kids do where they just listen to something over and over and they can't stop listening.
Yeah.
And how can you do that with jazz, like that's kind of cool.
Yeah, the Police were on my top 5 band list as well.
Yeah, it's what I studied with Vince Mendoza slightly, and he rings true when he goes, now there's music you listen to, but there's also music that found you, or you didn't find it, it found you. And then he plays this amazing list of music that covers a very broad spectrum of classical, jazz, and pop. And it's really, it made me think and go, that is what is the building blocks for you as a musician, whether you're a composer or a player. There's these building blocks that land on us, and we have to just find the right space for them to go, and then move on to all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm. One time I wrote a big band chart, and I don't know why this happened. It might have been because Dave Ravello shared a quote about waiting as long as you can before you put in a solo section.
Yeah.
I think it came from Bob Brookmeyer, but I said, okay, I'm going to try to write a chart with no solos. And it made me realize that we depend on solos sometimes simply to have a chart that's more than 3 minutes long.
It's true. Your development has to go a different way, which is probably why it was a good thing for me to study a lot of classical theory when I was at McGill. I had to do 2 years of classical, and it really taught me. I mean, I played through it. I was playing through Beethoven sonatas. I was working on Mozart, binary form, all this stuff. And I think Beethoven sonatas were what probably helped me understand that form has to keep going, and it's not just variation, even you can add other things. So that's kind of what Beethoven, to me, at least that was my stepping stone to realizing I can transition. And then it just goes back it goes back again to Vince Mendoza, the idea of transition, and transitioning maybe to a different key center than you thought you would land in, like Mahler or someone, where the twists and turns grab your ear, but they go somewhere else, and it doesn't have to come from the soloist. So, yeah, I think I've gotten past 3 minutes on a few things. Although, no, I still put solos in sometimes, but they're kind of more like transitions than solos.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. Less
in
about
a way, I want to blow up that whole Brookmeyer thing and just go, music is music. I know that he liked to push us through development, and it's important, but what is the purpose of the development? Do you know what I mean? I mean, I'd like to see 3 soloists going at it for 10 seconds and then move on, and that I'm not sure that's a solo section anymore. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
It might just be part of the form that leads to the real solo section. So again, going back to McNeely, it's about putting the making the stage. First of all, you gotta have a stage, and you put the and you start introducing characters, and the characters can be the form. The characters can be the soloists. The characters can be sections of, or what we call choirs in the big band. So I have my choir of saxophones, I have a choir of trombones, I have a choir of trumpets. And this is the language I'm starting to use with my students a lot more, because I think we always have this very formal way of saying trumpet 1, 2, 3, 4, or trombone, trombones and bass trombone. It's like, no, it's just a choir. It's like a soprano, an alto, a tenor, and a trombone. Maybe the trombones is not so much soprano, but there's a lead and they stack down. So if we think of choirs, the rhythm section is a different choir. It's more of a percussive choir with the piano really stating a lot of melody, but the bass is all about rhythm to me.
The bass is supreme.
Yeah, the drums are supreme, but they also don't work without the bass. So yeah,
Yeah, well,
I know.
if you're in the middle of composing or arranging, do you become obsessed with it? And by that I mean you're driving to Eastman or you're taking a walk that you find that you're working on this arrangement, like, all right, what do I do next? It's like trying to solve little problems in your head.
Yeah, it's the construction that goes on, and you're, as again, this interview I did before this had a similar question, and I was just like, he asked me, he said, "So, do you ever dream about your compositions? Like, do you have dreams about compositions or that you want to have?" I was like, "You mean literally sleeping?" I'm like, "When I sleep, I sleep. I unfortunately I get caught up in something that I might be working in. That's a drag because I can't sleep because of that. But it's not a drag because that means I'm really activated in solving doing that problem solving you're talking about, because something has to come from the step I've stopped at, or it also might go in the garbage, who knows. But the it's sort of like, if I really get into it, I do feel the power of the composition moving forward, and that comes also from preparation a little bit. So a lot of times I might try for, I mean, I was, another word I'm always using is that a lot of my music is not programmatic necessarily, but um, it's full of different episodes. So it's episodic. It's quite a bit of episode. I mean, I can break some stuff down into a 1 minute lead sheet if I had to, but instead I've been adding episodes all around it. So those are little, I like to think of it as making, as working on a puzzle. It's really a puzzle for me.
Do you find that your
Now I
music,
have this little red piece and I don't know where it goes yet, but I'm going to have to build up around it to get that little red piece connecting. But then there's some other red piece spots too. I'm not sure which one I'll get to. It kind of has to drive me as much as I drive it, which is different than problem solving necessarily.
oh, very interesting. Does your music, especially for large ensembles, really need to have a conductor?
Not always, no. And I'm noticing that too with a lot of that, the Brookmeyer stuff. I'm really caught up in like, oh, I can see what happened. He started to get really into the composer side of things, not sitting in the band. And then all of a sudden the Vanguard band, how are they gonna run this episodic piece? Someone has to direct it. Same with McNeely, he has to direct it from the piano. Um, and there's just little cues. And so that might be something that you kind of keep in your toolkit as one of the actions happening in the piece, because you want to play on it or you don't want to be conducting it. The other action that happens to me with my students is that they get so good at the music I don't need to stand there anymore. Right? If they're well rehearsed and the piece goes by, I barely need to be there. However, if I am going to be there, I'm hoping to give them some energy, like some Ray Wright. I don't know, or no, sorry, Ray Ricker. Ray Wright's dead. Ray Ricker was at a concert, or he watched a concert the other night, and he wrote me a note, and he said, "I love your minimalistic conducting. It's not like you're like the Wind Symphony conductors where you have to direct everything." And I said, "You don't need to direct everything in jazz. I mean, it depends on context a lot, but if the rhythm keeps the pulse of what's going on and it's well rehearsed, you barely have to do anything. All you can do is throw good energy at it at a certain point, which is what the great conductors were able to do because they had such great orchestras that knew the repertoire, as far as I'm concerned. You know,
Yeah, Basie at the piano, just like,
yeah, he's barely doing anything. It's just like 1, 2, 3, 4, off you go. Um, and yeah, I think the jazz repertoire for large ensemble is evolving all the time rhythmically, and using different meters and things. So it gets complicated. It's all time and place and what are we going to do? But I have to say, when I took my band on tour, the one opportunity I got to go across Canada, by day 3, I did not need to stand in front of that band. So I just started picking up my horn and playing melodies with them, or taking some solos. But it wasn't about me soloing. It was about just making the music, having fun with the music in the moment, which I hope happens.
Is there any Phil Woods in your alto playing that you're aware of?
People tell me I have Phil Woods in my playing, and that was one of those records that I got when I was young. So, and I think I obsessed a little bit over Billy Joel for a while, so
Okay.
it helped.
I was listening to
I met him once. I didn't really get to spend enough time with Phil Woods, and I should have.
oh, I was
Yeah.
listening to one of your tunes called Infinitude, and I think that's where wasn't it wasn't obvious. Something about it just made me think that you had listened to him to some extent.
Yeah, I listened to him and I played his solos, and I thought he was such an extension of Charlie Parker as he was, that it was comforting in a way that someone contemporary could play like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You and your sister play well together, and I think it was on that particular tune I noticed what a wonderful sound that she has down low on her.
Yeah, she's really good at
Oh,
low. Better than any trumpet player I've ever heard. And that's one, again, going back to collecting your tools. I think that's one she's used to her advantage. And she used to play flugelhorn, but now she has a trumpet that she's able to mask that flugelhorn sound and get low and warm and in tune, and it sounds nearly like an extension off the horn. But I know how she got there, actually. So if any kid ever wants to know, I'll tell them, sit down an hour a day and do long tones at the bottom.
when we started today, you had made a reference to jazz education and how I forget your exact words, but it leads me to wonder about women in jazz and women in jazz education. You have a feeling about, is it progressing? Where is it at?
I have very mixed feelings about the word progressing with it. There are some great things that are coming out. There have always been some great things. Maybe this time they won't be so hidden. I still think there's a boys' club going on, and an example of a hero of mine, honestly. Um, I've been really obsessing over those Rick Beato videos lately. They're all men talking about music for the most part. There's some women, very few, and and then they like to do things like say Brad Meldau is the pianist of our generation, the greatest pianist of our generation, and I'm like, you're not helping anything when you say these things. You know what I mean? I mean, it's great. Brad is endowed as the greatest piano player of our generation. A whole bunch of people are going to watch that and go, Brad Meldau is the greatest piano player of our generation. And I'm like, there are so many other pianists that you're not talking about in this breath that you might want to defend. I'm not going to get into it right now, but how how do we change this machine of of men kind of being the ones on stage still with other men? What does it take to change it? I don't know. Does it mean the club owners have to say you need to have 50-50 on the stage, or 25-75? I don't know. That would be even a cool number. And all of a sudden, is that going to change the audience? Is it going to change something else? Is it going to make it less popular? What's going on here? It's not even popular anyway. Programming is everything to me.
I remember speaking with Carolina Strassmeyer, and when she was chosen for this European big band, it was like splashed all over whatever media would would pick up on it, and then it became a
That was
tagline. It's like a tagline with her, the
tokenism.
the one female musician, and isn't that wonderful?
Yes, I've worked over there too. I was the one female musician too. So I, and I was, and I'm guilty of it myself. I'm surrounding myself with mostly men in a big band, but at least I have my music. I have control over some of the situation. I have my music. I get to choose who's there, including my sister. Um, I get to play in it this way. I get to play whatever I want, and I've kind of created my own circumstances for this to happen. And I can't say that it's a bad thing because the other thing was like going, oh, I just really want to play in that big band down the road that I could play second alto in. It didn't really ring true to me either. It wasn't part of the visual or the visage of this music. It's more like I want to be creating and not just interpreting, I guess. Um, so lucky me because I just sort of threw all that other stuff aside and went, if you want me, it's about what I have to offer as a composer and a musician, I guess. I mean, sometimes I get to, I don't get me wrong, I love to be able to sit down and play through a set of great someone else's music that's really fun. Like give me Jim McNeely's book any day or the Vanguard book. I would just love to be a part of that. But my path just kind of wove in a different direction because probably because of just privilege and opportunity and lack those two lacking things at times also.
It's been a fascinating conversation. I'm going to wrap up with it's not really a musical question, but I'm curious. Growing up uh, to the north in Canada, and then coming here, do you have uh, an opinion or a sense of where the United States is currently?
That's a terribly long, horrible question. I'm very worried. At the same time, I think some things will always survive. It's kind of like watching Wally the movie and you see the little plant that survives through all of it. I feel like music is like that. It's always going to be there. It's always going to survive. And I hope that it gives good to people because there's so much other stuff out there that's not good. Like crime. I moved here and I just went, oh yeah, guns and Medicare. These are the two issues. And in fact, guns are the top of the issue because they stem from all of the strife underneath it that is happening because of the erosion of simple things like that. Like in Canada, you don't spend your day talking about Medicare and going broke. Do you know what I mean? You don't that's just not a part of the conversation. Okay, we've gotten rid of something that takes up a lot of time and money. And now we can focus on other things. Not that Canada's the perfect place because it certainly isn't. They have a lot of there's a whole bunch of underlying things with social medical systems right now, especially the economy is still a problem. Here, I think there's a different focus on racial divide. Canada has a lot of issues they've never worked on. They just didn't have to deal with it the way the United States. They would have if they had more migration up there. And there is some, but it's not at the level of what happened in the States with the red line and with economic disparity amongst race. It's just so wrong. So I'm here dealing with all this at a institution of privilege, really, but hope that I do think that the positive thing is that we're all at least facing the demons I'm talking about and trying to find other solutions. It's gonna be hard. It's gonna take a lot of like really breaking some tradition that has been in the hands of the privileged. I don't know what it is, and I don't know how it will happen because the government coming in, just like in Canada, is going to slash anything to do with the arts because the arts are a voice for political movement.
Giving us a lot to think about.
I hope I said that okay, but I'm just like,
You said it's a long and terrible question. It's
yeah,
terrible that we have to even ask it, but I appreciate your thoughts today, and very illuminating.
yeah. And I think the whole world, again, I wrote a piece for Ryan Truesdell. He did a string project and it's called Tilting World. And I really feel like the world did some weird tilt in the pandemic because it just shook everything up and now we have to deal with it.
Yeah. Well, I want to wish you best of luck in your continued composing and playing and educating and all of that. And I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you. You inspire me by asking questions. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Sounds to me like you know what you're doing.
Sometimes, yeah.
All right. I hope to cross paths with you sometime.
Yes, look me up if you're in the neighborhood.
Very good.
Nice to meet you,
Likewise.
Mom.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.